take home the golden gloves, you've got to put in the work, and you've got to be tough as nails. Ashley Kalis was driven to achieve. Today, Kalis is still fueled by that same hope, grit, and determination. A mother of 3 school-aged boys and successful business owner who ran testing and vaccination sites across the state. Kalis is the fighter Rhode Island needs right now because it's time for a change. Ashley Kalis for governor.
Good evening for everyone joining the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those new to the program, my name is Irina Zuckerman, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. With us today is Dr. Emil Hasanov. He hails to us from Azerbaijan. He is an international expert on conventional weapons and a geopolitical analyst. And we'll be discussing with us a disturbing incident that happened recently involving a little, generally not well-known group of Shia extremists who had stormed an Azerbaijani embassy in London, and who prior to this incident wrote a direct attack on Azerbaijan's head of state, President Aliyev. We'll be discussing this incident in the context of the general regional security situation, developments in the South Caucasus, and of course, Iran. Emil, thank you so much for joining us today. If you don't mind telling us a little bit about your background, your work, and your professional interests.
Thank you very much, Irina, for such an opportunity to share our common interests and about some recent events, actually actions that are going and happening yesterday. But for sure, we'll talk about Iran. As understood, Iran is our neighbor. Nowadays, I'm in Baku, in Azerbaijan, and for sure, certain it's tell in advance still just happened yesterday, but for sure we gathered some information and some discussion going on about yesterday's incident, which captured embassy of the Republic of Azerbaijan in London by Islamist radicals, which is Shia wing. For sure that we have information that it is Yasser al-Habibi. He has a Kuwaiti citizen past, have some linkages to certain Shia movements from Iraq, and he said claiming that has some problem with the Iranian government as well. But anyway, it is action that was against the international law. Actually, Vienna Convention. For sure, lawyers and law enforcement will give a certain clear picture what kind of action it is. But so far, we see that it is attack against territory of Azerbaijan. I mean, because embassy is considered because of Vienna Convention territory of Azerbaijan. And it is terrorist attacks. It captured a place where civilians, diplomats, they are untouchable people. And for sure, such kind of action has a certain roots when we go back, we can see certain routes and can get few options which could be discussed, few scenarios which could be discussed. But anyhow, we know that this was Islamist radicals, it was Shia movement, and no, it was unfriendly act. It was more, I would consider like a terrorist attack against Azerbaijani embassy. And it's happened in London, which is a little bit confusing me because what's happened in such a developing country like in some other part of the world. It's happened in London, in the city. It should be properly investigated. As I know today, Deputy Ambassador of Great Britain was invited to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Azerbaijan and was discussed about the government expressed happiness with such kind of situations that UK government cannot provide security and safety pass of Azerbaijani citizens, diplomats. And it's quite a big signal for us. As I talk about nowadays on my own capacity, I think it's big signals. It's just to try to tell something in the future. But let's see how the situation will go on in the future, in the near future, and let's see what kind of investigation we'll get finally. What was purpose from side of Great Britain, because I said Great Britain officials said they will investigate and see what's going on. But one of the problems that these people get asylum in UK. You know, how do you get asylum in UK and with such a radical person? It's quite a sad story.
Has there been any warning or any prior tensions between that particular group and any of the Azerbaijani interests prior to this incident? Because this is a pretty obscure group, and while they have their radical history, they've been expelled from Kuwait, and this guy's citizenship was taken away. He is not an internationally well-known presence. How did he, were there any warning signs of trouble prior to this incident happening?
As you said, he's not a well-known certain environment, but for sure it's a certain background, because I said he spent a certain time in Iran, certain time in Iraq, was quite have a link just to Shirazi, one of the cleric persons from Iraq, the Iranian Shia movement, and he was trying to propose his agenda. But when you see, for sure, can't tell now in advance if directly coming from the Iranian side. But when we consider certain facts that happened and you put the guilt at a certain time, because you know, Azerbaijan has a armed conflict around Azerbaijani territory that claimed by Armenia that independent state. Of course, you won't consider as a part of Azerbaijan, it is Azerbaijan. It's Karabakh and Zengezur. And in this scenario, which is we try to build a peaceful region, Azerbaijan as a government, as a president proposed, certain agenda trilateral agreement was agreed in November 2020. For last events, you can see Iranian wasn't so cooperative regarding certain actions for the Zengezur corridor, because on 19th of July, President of Turkey and President of Russia met with Iranian leader, spiritual leader Khamenei, and discuss about corridor, about peace in Caucasus, because it is not only depend on one country. This peace is a region that European Union wants to do. Some countries think about, for sure, they have different scenarios how to do that. And openly, you know, it was agreed to put, you know, part of Azerbaijan, Nakhchivan, it is in enclave, you can tell that, separated from Azerbaijan between its Armenian territory. And it was agreed to build a corridor. Zengezur corridor will connect Nakhchivan, Azerbaijan, and use as a logistical road to Europe. That all countries, which is a region, including together some logistical access to Europe, and it will bring some economical development and some peace as a region. But Iranians part express their unwillingness to cooperate because saying that in this case, if corridor will be built for the territory of Armenia, they have a safety pass and clear pass from the Iran to the Iranian-Armenian border. In this case, because this corridor will go closer to Iranian borders, they will access to Armenian territory. There's one claim about that cooperation which happened recently. Few other actions, coincidentally, when we see how Iranians try to use Shia movement on the benefits of own political agenda, unfortunately, they're a big neighbor for sure. As Azerbaijanians, we want to have peace and a good cooperation among our neighbors because Azerbaijan is a tolerable country. We are tolerating all nations, all religions found the peace in Azerbaijan, which cannot tell about Armenia. And Iran supported that because of, from this point, certain connections. Even, very interesting point that Russia's ambassador in Iran is also Armenian, Levon Begizyan, quite well-known person. But it is a little bit different topic. I don't talk about political agenda of diplomatic approach in Iran. When we see Iran try to be everywhere, from my own point, as I said, I had certain missions in Iran, I had certain missions in Yemen. Everywhere we can see Iran. One of the points on Iran becoming active because of when you see how the Western countries try to deal with nuclear agenda of Iran, they have a different approach. When we talk about the West, nowadays it's not only West. You see West, it's Western Europe, and you see from different points, US and UK, different points. How they try to nuclear agenda of Iran to get, for sure Iran declared that we don't want to have nuclear weapons. It's not in our military strategy, not in our agenda, but it is just certain discussion that lasts for last years. And when we go to Yemen, you see maybe 10 years ago, Houthis, nobody cared about Houthis. When I was in Yemen, I discussed because of conventional weapons was my background. I took military and said, okay guys, this is Houthis create certain problem for you. That's it, no, this is okay, we control them. Just small group of guerrillas that Shia movement, they never can handle anything. But you see nowadays, Houthis become part of negotiation talks in Yemen. Even the ex-enemy Saleh joined them, but for sure he was killed because of the traits of that issues, but because of, and nowadays Houthis become part of negotiation process. You see the Syria. In Syria, because Alawites, one of the victims to Iran, they quite active. Bashar's government quite have a close relations. When we see Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guards very active in Syria. When we come to the other part of the world, Bahrain, 2011, yeah, for sure, Bahrain has a very sophisticated, very complicated system. 60% is Shia, but country ruled by Sunni groups, Sunni family. These are many very weak parts of the Middle East or Persian Gulf countries, which is surrounding them. This is always creates certain disbalance, and one of the problems which I face in my personal life. For sure, Iranians have a big history. It's a 1,000 years of history of diplomacy. Sometimes we not consider and not underestimate. When we talk, my personal picture when you build a picture of your counterpart. You see, I talked with one person, said, okay, the Iranian diplomats, when we see them, they're unshaved, without tie, it's certain different impression, how they negotiate, but they're quite strong, they know what to do. From other point, yesterday action, which is related to the embassy, yeah, they're Shia link, but I think we can just consider few options, and I hope in few days we'll have a much clearer pictures where is the lines going on to the Tehran or other part of the world. And for sure, everywhere we have a 50s, say, French connection or the drug dealer. Nowadays we have a Tehran connections. When you see some part of the world, something happened in Lebanon and Hezbollah, you see the control of Iran. You see nowadays in Syria, Iran become quite strong. You see the Yemen, Iran become really strong. 10 years ago, there was a picture of Houthis or Syrian agenda, but Iranian fully involved in the process. Because you see, in 19th of July, President of Turkey and President of Russia, one of the agenda was also Syria. Question how Iran becomes active. And nowadays, I see some European countries try to discuss, make a quick pact with Iran about agenda of nuclear deal. And for sure, US, Israel, and UK have a different agenda for Iranian nuclear deal. This is a problem with the Western part. That Iran is using this quick part of opportunity to promote the agenda in Syria, in Yemen. And you see nowadays all Middle East and some part of the Asia surrounded by Iranian influence. And we should tell that it is reality, and we should consider that in the future how to deal with these problems. Because of problem of the West, there no wise voice strategy. This is a big problem. That Iran are using that. For sure, Azerbaijan has a big history with Iran because from end of the 15th century to the beginning of the 16th century, Shia movement by Azerbaijani Turkish-speaking dynasty of cities. Because of that time was a war between two Turkish-speaking countries like Iran and Turkey, Ottoman Empire. And to advise them, it was put on the agenda to put the Shia and Sunni because they speak same languages, same dialect, but have a different country, different agenda. Since that time, country was ruled by ethnic Turkish. Still, Pahlavi come to the 30s, on 1930s of the 20th century. Despite this fact, Pahlavi's wife also was Azerbaijani. Such kind of agenda of Azerbaijan and Persian-speaking groups in Iran is very painful issue because nowadays, when the case of Azerbaijan comes to agenda of Iran, it's kind of painful issue of 30 million Azerbaijanis who living in Iran, because always in Tabriz and other parts of Iran, something can come, people go to the right on the street to claim and ask about their right to speak on their own languages in schools. This is some agenda which exists for many years, but nowadays, a political agenda, unfortunately, Shia movement become like a political agenda in Iran, and people just joining, you see in Lebanon, recent actions between Israel and south part of Lebanon with Hezbollah. You see recent issues with Azerbaijan. I mentioned to you about Zangezur corridor that Iranian was saying yes, but at the last moment, few weeks ago, they said, no, we don't support this idea, because in this case, if you build your corridor from Azerbaijan through Armenian territory, because Armenian has a passing corridor, the territory of Azerbaijan that helps them control, but they should move their armed forces from Azerbaijan territory. And it was discussed that we will have a corridor to Nakhchivan, which is an enclave and territory cut by Armenian territory. And just because in this case, imagine we don't have a map I can show you from the left side. This is Iran. In this case, is the corridor going on. Iran will not be able to control all parts of Armenia. This is another problem. You see in Syria, similar connections. The problem agenda of Shia movement become like obstacle to peace cooperation in the region. Unfortunately.
So we're seeing three different issues here at play. One is geopolitical, the Zangezur corridor potential, which Iran uses a geopolitical threat to its own trade interests and to its own regional influence. We're seeing religious issues. Azerbaijan is a Shia majority country, but it's a very secular, it's a very open and tolerant one with different religious groups coexisting. And we have an ethnic issue with a significant portion of Iranian population being of Azerbaijani descent, Turkic, as opposed to Fars. And that's also been a source of tension. Which of these factors do you think is the most influential one at the moment, and what has prompted this attack on the embassy specifically? What is the message here?
Message here, we have a few cases in Azerbaijan related to Iranian roots for the Shia riots in the street. I mean, it was a part of Baku. The country quite well established in the sense of law enforcement and law. The reason why Azerbaijan handled this on the proper way But problem, strong Azerbaijan always increase the certain interest of Azerbaijani population of Iran to join. For sure, I cannot tell that about what agenda, from a political agenda nowadays, from Tabriz side, from Azerbaijani minority in Iran, how they join. But this case coming for many years, because country separated, part of Azerbaijan living there, and certain radical rulers in Iran very threatened by situations that 30 million Azerbaijani will try to get on the street and say, okay, we have a right to speak the same language, we have a right to have school in Azerbaijani language, which they don't have. And this is political agenda to keep Azerbaijan always on the hook, to be weak, dependent. It is agenda. Nobody from this part, Iran doesn't want to see strong Azerbaijan. We don't talk about strong because of military. We try to build economy, we try to be integration to the Europe, we try to be integration to the Western countries, to the US, we are not claiming to be part of NATO. We are quite leading independent policy in the region, to cooperate with all neighbors, to understand the reality. We never act on the basis of religious affiliation of Azerbaijan. No, Azerbaijan, which is, as you mentioned, a secular state. I have a Jewish relatives, I have a Christian relatives. In Azerbaijan, it's very shame to ask what your nationality or religions. Which we cannot tell about Iran, and we cannot tell about their friend in Armenia. Because of Iran said, you know, last said we will never leave Armenia alone, because we will build the control of the Zangezur corridor to have with Armenia 1,000-year connection. It is lie. No 1,000, no Armenia 1,000 years ago. But because of certain Armenians will establish it in Iran, and it was connection, political connection. Your enemy, my friend. This is agenda, not because of agenda. But yeah, people very surprised. Okay, you are Shia, Iranian Shia. Why is that? Because we are secular. We are Shia state. Okay, we have a Sunni people also. We have a Jewish people. We have a Christian people. We never put an agenda our religion. We are a secular state. When people sometimes different between Islamic state because we never put our law based on the Sharia. This is why Muslim state, but on the street we can see the synagogue, we can see the church. This agenda for sure, Iranians see Azerbaijan become stronger for last 20 years, 25 years, and for last war, Second Karabakh War, we proved that we're quite able to build an army. We proved that we are able to build our diplomacy. We are able to build our strategy relation with the West. We are keen about our status in the international politics, and we did it, and we prove it. You know, without being claiming to be a member of NATO or be a member of European Union so far, but we built independent policies that we take care about all regions, because Azerbaijan become like a hub. We try to see not all Azerbaijan. We try to see this is agenda of post Second Karabakh War about 3+3 format that will bring 6 countries in the best way of economic development. And you see nowadays, Iranians are a little bit keen about, because they for sure they have their agenda to put the Persian Gulf to the Black Sea and Europe. They have agenda to certain discussions about Russian railways, but so far it was still not applicable because of Abkhazia railways, a little bit. It is part of Georgia. Many issues. And nowadays, you see in discussion with Turkey and Russia. When you see Syria, Azerbaijan for sure it's formally different country, but for sure that bargaining going about Syria, Azerbaijan versus Syria, Azerbaijan versus Syria. Quick we make from this, I will give you. This is a certain discussion with Iran using even to discuss about agenda for nuclear weapons. Nuclear deal, which they call it West. Every time there's a certain agreement come, and you see in a few months again something broken, again back to the same agenda, and it lasts for the last 10 years. And when you see such kind of unfriendly relations, and you see about agenda of nuclear, yeah, it's set of peaceful or humanitarian purpose, but I don't believe in humanitarian purpose when we have a big army that everywhere in the world, in the Middle East and Central Asia, and you say about peaceful agenda. I don't believe. Iran has a very great history, great literature, great poetry, and a 1,000-year history. But so far, we see the unfriendly relations, and so far we see they're not considering the peace for development. They're considering the arm, weapons to get a certain control. No, nothing about peace, unfortunately. And yesterday action, maybe this clerical guy was trying to show himself that yes, he's come to the agenda. You know, Daily Mail will write about him. You know, BBC will talk about him, becoming famous. But question: this time he will spend in Iran. This time he spent in Iraq, which he spent for certain Shia radicals. You know, reason why I highlight the radical, because nothing against Shia, because also Shia, nothing about Islam, I talk about radical Islam. This is a problem. Question, such kind of disturbances in the region coming every time. You see, I mentioned about Bahrain, I mentioned about Syria, and when it will stop, for sure we can talk about, you know, we depend on each other. We never go to the Mars, we never go to the space to live there. We have to live to each other, and Iran is a big neighbor, and Iran should consider our interests, Azerbaijan interests as well. Iran should consider the interests of Turkey, for sure should consider the interests of Armenia, but it should be interests of all countries who live in the region, not only dominated by Iran. This is agenda.
Now, some people are saying that this Kuwaiti group is a self-proclaimed enemy of Iran, that Khamenei has issued a fatwa against them. And, you know, if they are being directed against Azerbaijan, they're being directed by somebody else. That said, Iran has a long history of arming and backing groups that are not exactly on the same page, either religiously or in terms of agenda. It has backed Christian Armenians. It has worked with the Assad regime, which is Alevi, and it's sort of Shia, but it's not the same as the most of the Iranian population. And it has also worked with the Omanians quite well, who are also not exactly the same view, and Zaidi Houthis, who were at one point even closer to Sunnis than to Shia. So religious differences alone don't necessarily mean that the intelligence services want back that particular group against a particular common enemy when there is a reason for that. But the question is, why would they choose that particular group at this particular time, as opposed to, you know, some more expected terrorists or some other group? What do you think is happening here? Why that particular Kuwaiti group that no one knows about?
Actually, Irina, it's a very nice question, but it should be investigated. For sure, we have a certain, make our desk research, certain connections and get the information, but this matter, how you can complain and say, you know, I'm enemy of Iran, but question, you was under the influence, you was built, your capacity was built by Iranian people. You was brainwashed by these political Shia people. Where I said, I just tried to highlight, nothing against Shia people. You know, my country also Shia. Talk about political Shia movement. It's used like a political movement. You see the Hezbollah in party, and Hezbollah has armed wings, and also in a party represented in the parliament, and sitting in south of Lebanon. You see the Palestine, which is a groups which is a Sunni but supported by the Iranian Shia. As you said, the Alawites, it's maybe 15% of population of Syria, but they control all Syria. Iraq, you see in Iraq nowadays, it's more Shia than Sunni. In Saddam times, it was more Sunni rulers, despite the population majority of Shia. Nowadays, it's Shia. And even, not a secret, few ministers, a few people, political people in Iraq also part of Iranian connection, Tehran connection, because they live there, study there, certain support was provided to them. They never, you know, I can tell, you know, I don't have connection, but certain, your roots, your traces shows that this connection was going to certain part, go to Tehran, go to the certain political agenda. It's go to the Iranian Islamic Revolution Guards, which is control all situation. For sure, in Iran also another problem. In Iran, old generation, new generation more spoiled children, also old generation doesn't believe in such kind of, they want to have a luxury life. old generation living, a few days ago, I just saw some execution of one 50 years old lady who was forced to marry one old man, and she killed his husband. He just was hanged off. Such kind of issues of Iran, unfortunately, not always, but for sure, this part of Iran, they have their own rules and all the regulations in country, but problem that in regional approach, they don't support the peace movement in the region. This is a problem. Nowadays, I talk about Armenians. They said no. Armenians will never allow the Sunni part, which we call Zengezur, will never allow to cut our connection with Iran because we will build your corridor, which go take you to the Europe to provide certain good costs for the future, to logistical, to development. You see, at the same time, I just want to repeat about the Syrian case. And this guy from Kuwait, this guy, for sure, he was under influence of Iranian clerics. And question, how was trained at that? What was the action? Days ago, we had the armed conflict again in our territory with certain terrorists, armed groups, to expel them from the territory of certain fields. That because of they just completely destroyed and killed the soldier. And it's happening exactly in the day after that. This problem. Certainly, I will not tell what is going on, but certain facts build a certain line. We will not tell that, okay, I want to tell that. Certain actions line will build certain algorithm what's going on, what is in the future. This guy is maybe he's not a big guy, just certain young guy who wants to be famous. But who is behind? He's just visible part. Maybe for him, it's like an agenda to be famous, to be on TV, in London TV, UK, all the world now, Al Jazeera talk about him. We can't dream about that. But who is behind all this action? Why is this happening exactly all the time when it's happening in UK, Great Britain? It's happening in other embassy. Why it's happening against Azerbaijan? This is many questions and answers. But behind you see certain people and actions, and then only one indicator was going on. For sure, we will see in few months, few weeks, much bigger indicator, much bigger actions. Certain hint that yes, we are making a signal for you. We can do that. It's my personal view. Nothing. Personal view based on my own experience, on my view.
The same day as this incident took place, there was another security situation that arose from the Armenian forces getting into a skirmish with Azerbaijanis. The Armenian forces are supposed to be gone from all the liberated territories, but there was an attack, and there was an attack on the Azerbaijani military. There was a casualty. Do you think there was any level of coordination between these rising incidents in these provocations by the Armenian military and this incident yesterday? Is there a common thread?
As I mentioned, 2 days ago, Azerbaijani soldier was killed.
Mm-hmm.
According to the trilateral agreement, Armenia should assure and withdraw all the military forces from the territory of Azerbaijan by the end of June 2022. But nothing happened. Instead, we have a regular shooting on our side. We have we start our repatriation of the IDPs, which nowadays are liberated territories. We start building capacity for our civilians. We put the civilians very close. We try, the people want to go back to the areas after 30 years. And we start already doing in Zengezur, in Zengilan, which part of Azerbaijan liberated. And nowadays, such kind of action, for sure, it's Yerevan coordinates, my opinion, it coordinates with the Tehran for certain action, because I said 19th July discussion of the family was completely, it wasn't a line which was discussed before. It's just, we want to keep our control with Armenia, because 1,000-year relations. We don't want to leave Armenia alone. The question about Armenia, we talk about regional approach. Iran is the part of the trilateral agreement. This is agreement signed between Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Russia. But nowadays, European Union also fully involved to this process between two presidents of Azerbaijan, Mr. Aliyev, and Prime Minister of Armenia, Pashinyan. This is the case. Just after that, for sure, Azerbaijan had to make certain revenge actions to expel Armenians because we're already going to repatriate our civilians, and we don't want to have such kind of problem when in the shooting distance, Armenia has armed forces, and Armenia says, okay, we will do it next time. What time has come? Deadline was end of June. Nothing happened. Even more, armed forces of Armenia and other groups started shooting on Azerbaijani side, and we have to do that.
We've seen a lot of criticism launched at the Russian peacekeepers who are supposed to prevent provocations from occurring. Some say Russia has an interest in continuous state of upheaval and in preventing the final peace agreement from taking place between Armenia and Azerbaijan, especially now with the war in Ukraine. To what extent do you think this is a factor, and to what extent can Iran take advantage of these issues, and from Russia's interest in the war in Ukraine and from Russia's interest in impacting the South Caucasus?
Actually, when we talk about Russia, he said Russian ambassador, it is Levon Delayan, it is Armenia in Iran. Always you see certain, I don't talk about something, I talk about facts. Very active man, ethnic Armenian, citizen of Russia. They always promote interest of Russia with Iran, interest of Armenians in Iran. And from other point, yeah, recently we have a agreement of Russian Gazprom was to invest something about Iranian economy, with the oil and gas business. A certain discussion was going on. Certain, as I said, railways discussion was going to build certain Persian Gulf, Black Sea. And Russia said, okay, if in this case we should do something in Abkhazia railways as well, it exists. Certain agenda exists. And what is important? Nowadays, drones which are used by Russians, Iranian drones used in Ukraine, appear recently. And again, you see, even we now can imagine Iran and Ukraine, and nowadays we see Iranians' weapons appear in front of Ukrainian territory, which was deployed by Russian forces. This is the case. I mean, full involvement, and it's trying to expand the air adventures. Nowadays, already integrated with Russia military capacity. Nowadays, slightly getting in of Ukraine conflict, armed conflict. I can consider that it could be one of the case as well, but I cannot tell you 100%. But as I said, ambassadors are very active, Russian ambassador, ethnic Armenian person sitting there. For sure, relations with Iran, Armenia, and Russia has a big military contingent in Armenian territory. Nowadays, they have about 2,000 peacekeepers in Nagorno-Karabakh, which is a Karabakh territory. Nowadays, Nagorno-Karabakh not exists, territory of Karabakh and Khankandi. And I can tell you very on diplomatic way, I don't see Russia following the obligation on full capacity. I cannot tell that, because I see what's going on. My personal view that they can do it much, much better. Questions they cannot do, and the question maybe they don't want to do it anyway. It is not on the favor of Azerbaijan, not on the favor of the peace in the region.
Meanwhile, we are seeing different defense alliances forming among Western and Middle Eastern countries, primarily with the response to Iranian presence. We are seeing I2U2 between Israel, UAE, India, and the United States. We are seeing the Negev summit. We are seeing other types of groupings trying to develop some sort of a defense. UAE withdrew from an air defense pact that US was pushing. On the other hand, Iran is also looking to create alliances through various proxies. It's trying to negotiate issues with some of the Gulf states. Where does Azerbaijan fit into this picture?
Oh, it's not secret. Azerbaijan have a strong ally with Turkey, is a member of the NATO. For sure, Turkey our strong ally, our brotherly country. For sure, Azerbaijan has a good relation with Israel. It's also our ally and our friend in the region. We want to be with our neighbor with Iran to be very friendly. We'd like to be with our neighbors, set our population, big population is there, Azerbaijan is there, and we cannot ignore this fact. But question, it should be equal. You cannot tell you, no, I'm bigger, I want to control you. Just first is my interest, second your interest, I will consider it going well, I will leave you certain space for your interests. Good countries, for sure, it is a little bit different part of discussion, but some countries consider interest of the Turkey in Azerbaijan. I view that influence to push the Turkey, Iran sometimes uses tool to push Azerbaijan to influence on the Turkish decisions in the Middle East. Sure, Turkey very active in the Middle East and North Africa, and nowadays certain big discussion going about Syria, big discussion going about Afghanistan, which is mainly some Persian-speaking ethnic groups also there. We see the Taliban, certain discussions, certain actions going on, and we still don't know where to go, what kind of scale of the armed conflict will be there also in Taliban. I'm most surprised for Iranians also will appear there in future. Azerbaijan not pretend to be part of military actions. Azerbaijan try to be like an example of the peaceful negotiation process. You see, Azerbaijan part of non-aligned movement. Azerbaijan always proposes an agenda regarding Ukraine will provide humanitarian support to Ukraine. You know, otherwise we think about 3+3 format with certain countries to build a peace in the region, to make huge projects in the region. We now supply our gas to the Europe. You know, we try as a small country, maybe a region comparing with Iran or Russia, but we try to see big picture. And we try to build regions to make a big picture, to feel about prosperity of the countries. We don't think about, but for sure we care about how our future related to Armenian negotiations going on, because after 30 years we liberated areas. It cost us too much. It cost about 3,000 young lives, our country. We're not a big country, just 10 million. This is the reason why we really care about peace, we really care about economic development, we really care about our neighbors. And Azerbaijan was proposed peace agenda. You see, we always on the side of multicultural, secular state. We always propose this idea. You can see this Azerbaijani government ministers, you can see the Jewish, the Christian. It never is the case. But in Iran, it is the case, unfortunately. In religious agenda, it is the case. But we cannot say, okay, we just try to defend ourselves and show the good example. Because countries can follow us.
Speaking of peace building, one of the diplomatic initiatives that Azerbaijan is part of is the 3+3 dialogue format with its neighbors. Georgia is formally invited, but it's not currently participating, but other members are Iran, Russia, Armenia, and Turkey. What is the status of these discussions at the moment, and how does it fit in with these larger issues, conflicts, the Zangezur corridor efforts, and the Armenian normalization, trade normalization with Turkey?
Actually, as I mentioned in the beginning of our discussions about Zangezur corridor, which is formerly Iranian was a part of 3+3. Jordan have a certain, for sure it's our friendly state, but Georgia still have a certain agenda, economical, certain traces of the connections, how they will build the economical connection, because they have certain passes from Georgia as well, which is logistical, and it could be, as some politicians said, it could be some advantages, some certain good advantages, try to see a much bigger picture. Armenian has a chaotic rulers. This is a problem. When you see what is the head of the Security Council of Armenia said and what the Prime Minister said, it's always different things. It's a problem. But if this project will work, for sure it will bring a peace and economic development of all regions. All the 6 countries will be on the best shape, and will be integrated in the European economy, Black Sea economy for the Turkey. But unfortunately, you see last events, despite the fact a year ago it was formed 3+3, Iran was part of that, but on 9th of July meeting, Iranians said, no, we're not a big favor of the Zengezur corridor because of certain risks for, as I said, there's a certain old generation that dictated by Islamic Revolution Guards Corps, that their main agenda, they're like a hoax. They're not on the favor. They want control not by the soft power. They want to control with the hard power. So the war, military, and to control, full control. This is a problem. For sure, theoretically, 3+3 format is quite good. Even Russia also supported because it understands that they can avoid Georgian routes because of relations with Georgia not so good nowadays. It can have a direct access to the Zengezur, to the Turkey to the other part of the Europe. Turkey quite supportive. For sure, Turkey tried to find some solutions for Armenian problems, which is Armenians always clear about Turkey. This is a problem. Azerbaijan supported the projects, but Armenians not flexible on that. Just 2 years passed since 2020, Child Tail Agreement signed, but when you see come to the implementation, always certain arguments, always certain ideas appear on the brains of certain politicians in Armenia. And nowadays, they back to Iran, and Iran said, no, we don't want to lose our friend Armenians because Syrian leaders interest of Iran. Questions why? You have many things to do with your own problems, with the country, with human rights, with minority rights, this own problem with some generation of people of which is the Islamic Revolution Guards Corps or some politicians like the parliament. This is a problem.
From a practical standpoint, any continuing upheaval in the region endangers vital sources of energy and food production at the time of multiple ongoing global crises, the energy crisis, inflation, food shortage as a result of both environmental and geopolitical factors. What is the European Union's view on these disruptive mechanisms? What has the EU and international community have done to try to return to a more peaceful platform?
For sure, European Union with the Council of European Union quite active. I said in the beginning, President of Azerbaijan, Mr. Aliyev, and Prime Minister of Armenia, Pashinyan, quite actively meet with Brussels with the head of Council of Europe, and always an agenda, and certain movement and certain progress was done because of Azerbaijani side always shows us flexibility and willingness to get the peace, which we can't know about Armenia. Other problem with Armenian side about, as I said, it is not exactly on the big scale of the picture of geopolitics of the world, but problem which completely destroy economical development, economical plans. This is landmine issues. Because, you know, Armenians for 30 years planted landmines on the territory of Azerbaijan, civilian populated areas, not on the border. You know, this is quite case, and nowadays we have to clear all landmines. And you see, Azerbaijan had to do it alone. Sure, European Union recently expressed their willingness to allocate an amount of money. UN development program also very active to show that. But problem, Armenians should be liable for that. And imagine Armenians provided 25% of the maps, records, which are imprecise and not properly recorded. Intentionally, maybe because of, anyway, it is not a precise, maybe more than half of these maps, not precise, and this is wrong records. And according to these maps, about 310,000 landmines exist on the city. This is 25% of them. Now multiple to the 4. How many miles? And it should be cleared by my country, by Azerbaijan. And this is big obstacle on development of the region because country had to do it alone. We have a big number of civilians. And from other point, Iranian process, which is try to not support this idea about the Zengezur corridor we can bring to the region. Bring peace of the region also will open certain doors for the peaceful cooperation from other hand. You know, this is interlinked to each other. And that kind of players, for sure Iran is players, its neighbor, try to influence the process. But if you talk about proxy war in Syria, or proxy war in Yemen, here a little bit difficult because not much armed forces which controlled by Iran, but from political agenda and political links, it's control the situation of the region that completely destroy relations and mutual trust between parties. As I said, not because Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan said, okay, we will stop the war, but we give a chance to Armenians to leave the armed forces from territorial Azerbaijan. We will not go from this deeper in the region. But it's not happening. This is a problem. European, for sure, as I said, European becoming keen, and we have a quite good relations, and very often and very recently we had meetings. Our president has a meeting with head of European Council. But as I said, unfortunately, not enough. It needs all region players like Iran should be very flexible and very cooperative to bring a peace to this region, because 30 years is quite. We are small countries. We are South Caucasus, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia. And Georgia has a big problem. The occupied territories, our occupied with the liberated majority of territories, peacekeepers of Russia sitting. But we still cannot get peace. We want to integrate to the big picture of the economic development of the region.
From what I'm hearing, France has actually presented Azerbaijan with some equipment and assistance in the demining field, but the issue is still quite extensive. What further cooperation would Azerbaijan like to see from the international community in addressing this issue? Do you see a need to pressure Armenia for better maps? Do you see the need for more equipment and volunteers? What is needed to resolve the crisis?
As I said, European Council, European Union Council and the Council, Charles Michel was very active, and recently it was allocated about 4 million. You know, when I talk about conventional weapons of my background, I also mainly in landmines, the mining issues, the mine action programs. My background. Humanitarian demining is quite an expensive process. This is why I always say demanding, but humanitarian demining. It's quite expensive than military demining. Because you see, to plant a landmine is cost about 30 cents. But to demine, sometimes come to $10–15. Quite huge. When we multiple to the efforts to the million miles, it's quite. And if Armenian could, for example, you see, when we have a maps, it would cost much cheaper. When we don't have a maps, you should demand all areas. And even a donation of European Union, for example, I don't want to tell exactly the figures because still in advance, if for 4 million we can clear about 500,000 landmines, when all maps exist, all records exist, when we don't have a map, it just clears the 50,000. And you see the cost, how much it costs, but behind the cost is life of the civilians, women and children, one of the vulnerable group of the victims of the armed conflicts. This is a problem. For sure, Azerbaijan has one of the quite efficient program of humanitarian demining. It's 25 years program. I was on the part of the team who was built this program with UN together with Azerbaijan. I mean, one of the good point of government and the president of the state in the end of 90s, he built the humanitarian mine action center as a humanitarian, which is an independent humanitarian body, not civilian body, not belongs to Ministry of Defense, not belongs to Ministry of Internal Affairs or Ministry of Emergency, because when it is the Balkans, in Bosnia it is part of Ministry of Emergency, in Croatia part of Ministry of Interior, in Ukraine it's part of Ministry of Defense. This is quite complicated, you know, decision-making process quite long. Azerbaijan is a country where government and top prime minister and president fully dedicated to humanitarian mine action. And you see nowadays main part of the money done by governmental budget. For 30 years, country provide all the best efforts nowadays to do the demining, humanitarian demining in the country. For sure, even the country provides support to other countries. This is not many examples that have a humanitarian civilian mine action center and government on such a top level committed to humanitarian mine action. Problem, yes, we said Azerbaijan not a part of Ottawa Treaty, Azerbaijan not a part of cluster munition convention or Oslo Treaty. Yes, because of certain have a justification for that. Because no one neighbor signs that. This is another problem. But despite the fact, we handle all our problem ourselves. And this country was doing alone, and for 30 years we built a quite good program that's supported from the top to the bottom of this country. And I said the government fully committed to humanitarian mine action. Center built the humanitarian center. It works. And unfortunately, not always we get the appropriate support from certain countries. As I said, Armenia liable. This is some question. Armenia said, no, you not control the, but yeah, they control the situation. Question, landmines was also put on the border. Landmines were put on the areas which are populated by civilians. Nowadays, we have to handle this problem. You see in the Eastern and Western Europe, certain problems from exist since First World War. This is a problem. When people find remnants of war or landmines since Second World War, in the Korean War. Nowadays, you can see in Vietnam, you can see this landmines. So cannot eliminate the problem. And imagine we have a small country with 10 million population, 1 million mines estimated in the country. This is quite huge. Who will be liable for that? This is a problem. What was that? This is a problem.
In addition to this ongoing problem, we are now seeing a disturbing shift where Iran is turning its attention from Yemen temporarily towards Central Asia, possibly with cooperation from Russia. Central Asia, Asian countries have always have enjoyed a long diplomatic relationship with Azerbaijan. Do you see these moves after the Tehran summit endangering these interests? Or how do you see this shifting framework in the region and the greater Iran involvement impacting Azerbaijan's role with those countries?
When we talk about Central Asia, for sure, Azerbaijan built a quite efficient and very friendly relations with Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan. I mean, when we talk about past Soviet countries, we quite have an excellent relations. Recently, head of the state was visiting Tashkent, Uzbekistan. Visited Kyrgyz president was in Azerbaijan. Have excellent relations with Tajikistan. Not agenda was a problem with Azerbaijan. For sure, this country, secular state, they understand this agenda of Iran and quite, yeah, there could be the diplomacy always exists. Diplomacy is the first, but it doesn't mean that it will be just everybody will relax and say, okay, let's just open the door for all movement, all process, all economical involvement in the country. Another problem of Afghanistan, that the border with Uzbekistan. And certain instability in Afghanistan can create certain problems. Yes, for sure, Russian forces, border service controls the border in Afghanistan. But we will never surprise, I will never surprise if I will see Iranian agenda and Iranian influence appear in Afghanistan. Also possibility of the future, because for sure we know Turkey exists, armed forces exist in Kabul. Not the left and Turkey still exists, just to build and keep stability in the region. But we see Taliban regime still, government still not fully predictable. And for sure, there's certain, there are no big language problems, there are no big border issues, because very close neighbors, influence, cultural issues. And this could be second problem when we see another proxies appear in Afghanistan. Yeah, Al-Qaeda was gone. From a certain point, Al-Qaeda was eliminated. But I would not surprise if in the near future we will see somebody from Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps relative sitting in Afghanistan and control certain operations. This is another threat that could be potentially, but this threat can, through such kind of line, create certain problem on the border with ex-Soviet Asian countries, as I said, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan. Nowadays, we see big movement. Yeah, for sure, majority of the groups are Sunni wings of Islam, but you see the Palestinians are also Sunni, but they are supported by Shia groups of Iran. This is come from Tehran. I talk about Palestine, which is not which is a part of separated part of the Palestine. This is a problem.
We have heard actually both Sunni-linked and Shia-linked organizations trying to recruit from some of those countries. We are hearing increasing stories of both of initially Taliban and now increasingly ISIS recruiting from the Central Asian countries, but we've also heard of Iranian IRGC connected groups training camps in some areas. Azerbaijan, for its own part, have taken steps to protect its own sovereign interests in recent years. It has resisted, it has kicked out clergy that has been trying to radicalize or spread radical ideas. It has arrested militants and terrorists in the past, but all of that has not gone without consequence because propaganda efforts by some of these lobbies belonging to the groups in the West has pushed for Western criticism against supposed infringements of freedoms of these extremist organizations trying to recruit, trying to use soft power in Azerbaijan. What do you see happening next as a result of increased extremism in the general vicinity? Do you foresee future attempts to infiltrate the country? Do you see the need to take further security measures, or do you think that they will stay out for the most part?
Actually, Azerbaijan handles this quite on proper way and on the efficient way. So far, it is quite controlled movement. But problem, Western countries, they usually, my personal opinion, always support Azerbaijan. They see different agenda. Maybe for some point from religious perspective, from some point they evaluate Azerbaijan from different their own indicators, which not always applicable to Armenian side, despite Russian forces have a big Russian base in Armenia, 5,000 people. You know, Azerbaijan, Georgia, in the beginning of 90s, withdraw all Russian military forces from the territory. Armenia still keeps them. But despite this fact, some of them support. But I don't want to bring all the case to Armenia, but question of approach of the West. West should support Azerbaijan. When I talk about the West, I talk about certain countries. And we should understand there's a border when East meets West. And exactly this border which can be controlled from all this. We have in Wahhabi issues, Salafist issues, radical Shia issues. I talk about Wahhabi, Salafi also with radical point of view. We have these problems. We are Muslim, we are a young, small country. We're from all parts of we're surrounded by this country, but not in the other part of other continent. We're a neighboring country. But country efficiently handles the situation. Hypothetically, for sure, it's possible. And we have certain signals about that. For sure, when we talk about ISIS, we see some people from Azerbaijan appear there. You know, yeah, ISIS is mainly a Sunni group, but you know, such kind of group, they don't have a peaceful agenda. They have only common enemies. Common enemies. Okay, let's join our efforts together. Then we'll divide. Who is Sunni, who is Shia, and divide our territory. It's also possible. Huge amount of money will come into this part to solve certain problems, to influence certain processes in the Middle East, in the Central Asia, so that kind of actions, serious actions. And a few days after they go, let's start negotiating. Something happened, and 2 days after they again sit on the table, and you see agenda changing because of just make a signal, make a hint that, you know, we can do this. This is a problem. And Azerbaijan, quite efficient country. As I said, we have a secular ideology, and I don't think we will lose our control. Government quite efficient as that. From other point, we are freedom of religion. everybody can follow the religions, and there's no problem with that. We're not put it's not a Soviet time. We respect everybody have the right and to choose religions. And we're not separate from the point of if he quite from Shia or Sunni, okay, you could be group of the risk. That never happened. This country is Muslim country. And we are quite proud of this fact. And some political agenda for sure exists. If you remember, in Chechnya was certain movement from radical Islam from the Middle East. From Chechnya was coming to Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan has a problem in the 90s. The Iranian issues was in Azerbaijan as well. Everything was handled on proper way. For sure, some action can be done by our enemies. But question how we prevent and mitigate the risks. This is the case. You know, even in some countries with huge economical GDP, you can find the crimes. But question how the country handles the crimes, how the criminals jail in the court, how the justice prevail. This is the case. And this country, for sure, human factors always exist, but question the system quite efficient. You know, everybody stands before the justice and gets this penalties and punishment for the actions to be given with civilians.
Finally, to end on a kind of a European again note, Azerbaijan is playing a prominent role in NATO. It is being seen as an increasingly important and reliable partner. How do you see these tensions with Armenia and with other actors playing out within NATO? What role do you see Azerbaijan playing in the next few years? How is it going to handle disputes over various issues, and what can be done to strengthen NATO at this time?
Actually, Azerbaijan not a part of it as discussed, and I don't think Azerbaijan have an idea to join NATO. For sure, we cooperate. We can cooperate bilateral relations with Turkey. We can cooperate, have military drills with Georgia, with Turkey, with Russia, with joint military. But for sure, NATO country has a certain agenda in the region because they have a reliable partner like Turkey in the Middle East and Central Asia. We have a bilateral relations with Turkey to help us to build our army. You know, beginning of 90s, on time of Yeltsin, they just put us outside of the say, okay, you just go and train your people yourself because you don't want to keep our army in your territory. We will not train you. So okay, no problem. We will get a NATO status from the Turkey, but doesn't mean we are part of NATO. We have a mutual interest. Sure. It could be with NATO. It could be with ASEAN group tomorrow. It could be with other countries, with other. I said nowadays Azerbaijan is a chairman of non-aligned movements, like big structure. Azerbaijan part of certain groups like OSCE. We are not don't have OSCE, but we are for sure have a mission in OSCE, Security and Command Europe. We have a certain UN rules which prevail everywhere. We are part of peacekeeping forces. We are assigned in Kosovo, assigned in Afghanistan. This is NATO interest for sure. If it does meet our interests, where as equal partners can build our relations, especially if you have such a common friend like Turkey. Why not? And I said, if 10 years ago, we never imagined Turkey will be part very closer to this part of the region because we consider it as a member of NATO, but we're not a NATO member. If it meets our interests, we can cooperate, why not? If it is of stability or security in the region, Azerbaijan always of the favor of the justice and security and stability in the region. Because we want to propose the security, we want to propose a future development of the region as a whole, not like Azerbaijan independently. We see the picture is Armenian as well. It's a picture of economic development. We propose them to cooperate because we cannot ignore this fact. They cannot. The problem of, again, I come with a painful case. They just, anyone with all states, have a claim to the Georgia territory. They have a claim to the territory of Azerbaijan. They have a claim to the Turkey. You will put your relations in the country. You see it's not working. You should change your mind. Not the question of the love. The question just common interests and common future, common peace of the region. Just think about your future. Think about your children. Don't you want to get the war? This is the problem. And if we can, Azerbaijan can cooperate with any structure which is a legitimate structure in the world, with legitimate structure, regional structure like a NATO. It could be tomorrow other structure is a region as well.
Do you see, by the way, Turkey creating its own defense alliance with Azerbaijan and perhaps other countries?
No, we have a cooperation agreement with Turkey. Alliance for sure, we're allied with Turkey. We quite have a very brotherly relations, have a friendly relations, brotherly relations. And alliance is not against alliance to just protect. This is the case. We are not going to allow to, to capture the other territory of other countries like Armenia did with support of some other countries. We just keep an alliance to protect ourselves, protect our interests, and at the same time the peaceful region.
But what I mean is, do you see a multilateral bloc of several countries, not just the bilateral agreement between Turkey and Azerbaijan, but more over a regional grouping of some sort of cooperation based on specific interests or specific defense issues?
It's possible, for sure, it should be done because we see NATO is also a regional structure. But NATO is North Atlantic organization, which is more regional structure. You see, OSCE is a regional structure, which covers also Asia, despite the talk about security in Europe because of interest. I remember many years ago when Malta became part of EU, taking the network with most of the USA. When EU will finish, when they stop. So after Malta, it stopped because, it's just before the Morocco, it will stop. But it's already, we're talking about regional cooperation. It's not only geographical region. We're talking about regional interest of expansion of the security point, peace point. And it's normal. I said when we have a regular, in the past we have a regular military drills with Georgia, Turkey, Azerbaijan, because we have a certain drills and possibility exists that Turkey will build a certain alliance with country to the region. If this efficient and can protect the peace and guarantee economical development of the region, why not? I think all other big regional players like NATO also will support because Turkey, I said, have a certain obligation within their membership of NATO. Mean always interest shouldn't be contradiction to each other. Sometimes could be supporting each other. Yes, NATO cannot build certain ally with Asia, but if Turkey can do it, why not? And if they support these ideas and efficient way of cooperation, why not? If they protect from terrorism, why not?
Exactly. Well, I see it's a very interesting sign that right now a lot of these attacks by Iran, for instance, are going through proxy groups rather than direct, because they also have their own relationship with Turkey, and probably a direct attack on Azerbaijan at this time would lead to at the very least a very challenging tension with Turkey over this matter. I think it's very curious to see how they're going to try to balance their attempt to put pressure on Azerbaijan over its interest in Zangezur or against Zangezur rather, and so forth, versus their attempt to balance their relations with Turkey over other matters. So a lot to be seen in the near future. For now, I definitely see a very delicate security balance being struck here in Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan has a very complicated but also very promising and increasingly prominent position as well. So
it's called a sandwich country.
So definitely we'll be watching these events as they happen, and hopefully talking more in the future, depending on what happens next and what else we find out. Thank you so much for joining us with this interesting.
Thank you very much.
And for everyone watching, I hope you take note of these developments. A lot of the media coverage ignores South Caucasus, ignores these developments, but as the world becomes increasingly integrated, what happens in South Caucasus, as you see, doesn't necessarily stay there. Worth watching for sure, worth engaging. Azerbaijan is playing an increasingly important role in energy exports, and as such, will become a very important geopolitical player, both for its friends and enemies alike. Thank you for everyone who've joined the Washington Outsider Report this week. Stay tuned for our next edition, Tuesday nights at 9 p.m. With you was Irina Tsukerman, the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider, and Emil Hasanov, a geopolitical analyst expert on conventional weapons. Thank you so much.